There are stars, and then there are those rare souls who become something more, a living symbol of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of survival. Sandra Bullock is one of those rare souls. For more than 3 decades, she has been a fixture in Hollywood, her name synonymous with warmth, authenticity, and a kind of grace that seems almost impossible in a world built on illusion. But behind the dazzling smile, the red carpet gowns, and the billion-dollar box office hits lies a story that is as raw and human as any ever told. At 61, Sandra Bullock's journey is not just a tale of fame and fortune, but of heartbreak, loss, and the kind of courage that is forged only in the fires of life's cruelest storms. From the outside, it's easy to see only the triumphs, the unforgettable roles: Annie Porter in Speed, Leanne Tuohy in The Blind Side, the fierce astronaut in Gravity, the awards, the laughter, the effortless charm that made her America's sweetheart. But to truly understand Sandra Bullock, you have to look past the headlines and the movie posters. You have to see the little girl who never quite belonged, the young woman who fought for every inch of her place in the world, and the mother who would give up everything to protect her children from the pain she knows all too well. Sandra's story begins far from the glittering lights of Hollywood, in Arlington, Virginia, where she was born to a German opera singer and an American voice coach. Her childhood was a study in contrasts: European discipline and American ambition, the structured world of music and the chaos of constant change. By the age of 5, Sandra was already performing on stage, her fragile voice blending with children's choirs in grand European halls. But while other children played outside, she learned to obey strict rehearsal schedules, her days marked by the weight of expectation rather than the freedom of youth. Moving from city to city across Germany and Austria, Sandra never had the chance to put down roots. Each new place meant saying goodbye to friends, starting over, and learning to adapt. When her family finally returned to the United States, the ache of not belonging only grew sharper. Her classmates mocked her accent and her clothes, the laughter in the hallways a constant reminder that she was different. It was a loneliness that would shape her for years to come, carving deep scars of isolation, but also planting the seeds of empathy that would later define her both as an actress and as a human being. It's easy to forget, when watching her light up the screen, that Sandra Bullock's journey was never one of effortless ascent. She was not born into privilege or fame. She did not have powerful connections or a famous last name to open doors. What she had was a relentless drive, a stubborn refusal to give up, and a willingness to endure whatever it took to chase her dream. After leaving East Carolina University, just shy of a drama degree, Sandra moved to New York City with nothing but hope and a handful of credits to her name. The city was merciless. She worked nights as a bartender, waitress, and coat checker, scraping by on instant noodles and bitter coffee, her body running on exhaustion and sheer willpower. The early years were filled with rejection. Films came and went without notice, her performances lost in the shadows of obscurity. But every no became fuel, every failure a lesson in resilience. Sandra learned to carry her scars with pride, to let them harden into strength rather than bitterness. She refused to let the world define her by her setbacks, choosing instead to define herself by her ability to rise. Again and again, no matter how many times she was knocked down. And then, almost overnight, everything changed. A supporting role in Demolition Man put her on the map, but it was Speed that made her a star. The role of Annie Porter wasn't written for her, but Sandra's raw vulnerability and undeniable chemistry with Keanu Reeves made her impossible to ignore. The film exploded at the box office, and suddenly, the girl who had once been invisible was the face of Hollywood's next generation. Fame, when it finally arrived, was both a blessing and a test. Sandra Bullock became a household name almost overnight, but with every new success came new challenges. The world saw the glamorous premieres, the magazine covers, the effortless wit on talk shows. What they didn't see was the relentless pressure, the fear of losing everything she had fought so hard to gain, and the constant battle to remain true to herself in an industry that rewards conformity over authenticity. Sandra's rise was meteoric, but it was also lonely. She was suddenly surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Producers, agents, fans, and critics, each with their own expectations and demands. Yet, even as the world crowned her America's sweetheart, Sandra never lost sight of who she was. She brought the same empathy and vulnerability that had once made her an outsider into every role she played, in While You Were Sleeping. She captured the hearts of millions with her portrayal of a lonely transit worker who finds love in the most unexpected place. In Miss Congeniality, she made us laugh and cheer for the awkward, determined FBI agent who learns to embrace her own quirks. Each performance was a reflection of Sandra's own journey, her struggles, her hopes, her refusal to be defined by anyone else's standards. But Hollywood is a place where the spotlight can turn harsh in an instant. For every box office hit, there were disappointments and setbacks. Speed 2T Cruise Control was a critical and commercial failure, a painful reminder that success is never guaranteed. Sandra took the criticism in stride, even joking about the film's reception years later. But behind the humor was the sting of public humiliation. She had only agreed to the sequel in exchange for the chance to make Hope Floats, a film she believed in with her whole heart. It was a risk, a gamble that didn't pay off in the way she had hoped. But it was also a testament to her willingness to fight for the stories that mattered to her. It was during these years that Sandra began to take control of her own destiny. She founded Fortis Films, her own production company, determined to shape the kinds of stories she wanted to tell. She produced and starred in films that showcased her range and depth, from romantic comedies to dramas that explored the complexities of love, loss, and redemption. She even ventured into television, producing the long-running sitcom George Lopez, proving that her vision could reach far beyond the silver screen. But even as her professional life soared, Sandra's personal life was marked by heartbreak and loss. The world saw the glamorous relationships, the high-profile romances, but they didn't see the pain that came with betrayal and disappointment. Her marriage to Jesse James, a union that seemed to promise the family and stability she had always longed for, ended in a very public and devastating scandal. Just days after winning the Academy Award for her role in The Blind Side, a moment that should have been the crowning achievement of her career, Sandra was blindsided by revelations of her husband's infidelity. The headlines were merciless, the paparazzi relentless, and the pain almost unbearable. Yet, even in the midst of her darkest days, Sandra refused to let bitterness define her. She chose silence over spectacle, dignity over revenge. She focused on her newly adopted son, Louis, pouring all her love and strength into building a safe and loving home for him. The world saw scandal. Sandra lived rebirth. She turned her private agony into a quiet triumph, proving that true strength is not measured by how loudly you fight back, but by how gracefully you endure. Motherhood became Sandra's anchor, her reason to keep moving forward when everything else seemed to fall apart. She shielded Louis from the chaos of fame, determined to give him the stability and love she had always craved as a child. In the quiet moments, away from the cameras and the headlines, Sandra found a new kind of happiness, a sense of purpose that went far beyond awards and applause. But life, as Sandra would learn again and again, has a way of testing even the strongest among us. Just as she began to rebuild, to find joy in the ordinary moments of motherhood, another storm was waiting on the horizon. It would be a test not just of her resilience, but of her very sense of safety and peace. The night of June 8, 2014, would forever change Sandra Bullock's sense of security. After a long day, she returned to her Los Angeles home, expecting the comfort of silence and the peace of a house at rest. Her son, Louis, was safely with his nanny for the night. But as Sandra settled in, a faint sound broke the stillness. At first, she thought it was nothing. A creak, a distant echo. But the sound grew closer, more insistent, until dread settled in her chest. Someone was inside her home. Alone and terrified, Sandra locked herself in her bedroom, then fled into her closet, clutching her phone with trembling hands as she dialed 911. Her voice on the emergency call was barely more than a whisper, thick with fear and disbelief. In those agonizing minutes, she realized that all the walls, gates, and security systems in the world could not keep terror from slipping through the cracks. The intruder, a stranger named Joshua Corbett, had been stalking her for days, leaving notes and watching from the shadows. He was caught that night, but the true weapon he carried was not a gun or a knife. It was the lasting trauma he left behind. The scars from that night were invisible, but they ran deep. Panic would strike Sandra out of nowhere. Tears would come from something as simple as looking out a car window. She admitted to friends that she unraveled, her body replaying the terror again and again. What haunted her most was not just her own fear, but the possibility that Louis might sense it too, that her son would inherit tremors not written in blood, but in silence. Determined to heal, Sandra turned to therapy, piece by fragile piece reclaiming her peace, not just for herself, but for the little boy who deserved to grow up unshadowed. This was a new kind of battle, one fought not on movie sets or in the glare of paparazzi, but in the quiet corners of her mind. Sandra Bullock had survived Hollywood's storms, but now she was surviving storms of the soul. And in her fight was a truth more haunting than any role she ever played. Even the brightest stars are not immune to darkness, but the bravest are the ones who fight to heal. For years after her divorce, Sandra carried herself with quiet dignity, raising Louis with a fierce devotion that shielded him from the chaos of fame. But even surrounded by the purest kind of love, there lingered an ache, an emptiness only true companionship could fill. That changed in 2015, when photographer Brian Randall entered her life. He was hired to capture Louis's 5th birthday party. But what began as a professional encounter quickly deepened into something neither of them had expected. Brian saw Sandra not as a star, not as an Oscar winner or a box office queen, but simply as herself, a woman worth cherishing. Their bond grew naturally, quietly, away from the public eye. Sandra soon expanded her heart again, this time with Brian by her side. Later that year, she adopted Lila, a brave little girl from foster care who had already endured more hardship than any child should. Brian, once a model turned photographer, brought with him the wisdom of fatherhood. He had a daughter of his own, and with that came patience, gentleness, and an instinctive understanding of love's responsibilities. He became more than Sandra's partner. He became a father figure to Louis and Layla, the steady presence who matched her devotion with his own warmth. To the children, Brian was not just mom's companion, but the fun parent, the one who made ordinary moments sparkle with humor and tenderness. Though Sandra and Brian never married, their commitment was no less profound. Friends who saw them together spoke of a peace in her they had never witnessed before, a serenity that softened even her sharpest edges. After years of betrayal, loneliness, and nights spent wondering if love had abandoned her for good, Sandra had found her harbor. Their home was alive, with the kind of happiness that can never be staged. School runs with laughter spilling through the car windows, late night talks in the kitchen long after the children had gone to bed, birthday candles glowing in the soft warmth of family. For a woman who had spent decades under the harshest lights of Hollywood, it was this ordinariness that felt extraordinary. It was the dream she had once feared might never come true. The dream of a complete, loving, and unshakably real family. But just as Sandra Bullock dared to believe she had finally found her safe haven, life delivered a blow so cruel that no amount of fame, fortune, or inner strength could soften it. In 2020, Brian Randall, the man who had become her anchor, her partner, and the father her children adored, was diagnosed with ALS, a disease as merciless as it is mysterious. ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, is a thief that steals strength piece by piece, robbing the body of movement, then speech, until only the mind remains, trapped and helpless. For Sandra, the diagnosis was a nightmare made real, a test of love and endurance that would demand everything she had left to give. Together, Sandra and Brian made a pact of silence. We didn't want the kids' joy poisoned by a countdown. She would later confide to a close circle of friends. It was not secrecy born of shame, but of love. Luis and Layla deserved birthdays with balloons, not hushed conversations about decline. So Sandra quietly stepped back from the world. No more premieres, no more red carpets. Her stage became a kitchen, where she cooked Brian's favorite meals, a bedside where she whispered comfort in the small hours, a home transformed into a sanctuary of care, where nurses blended into the rhythm of family life. The world saw almost nothing of her then. Just flickers, paparazzi whispers, fleeting sightings. But behind closed doors, Sandra was living the hardest role of her life. Not as an actress adored by millions, but as a caregiver who refused to let the man she loved face his illness alone. She learned the rhythm of machines, how to soothe him through the long nights, when sleep would not come, how to feed him with a patience born of devotion. She kept the house filled with warmth, playing music he loved, keeping laughter alive so that Luis and Lila would remember their father not for the disease, but for the love that wrapped around him until the end. She clung to fragments. The curve of his smile when Luis told a joke, the way his eyes softened when Lila slipped a handmade drawing into his hand, the whispered thank yous that cost him all his strength yet meant everything. Every little moment felt like gold dust. She would later recall, and in those words lived the truth. She had carried him through the darkest hours, not with despair, but with a love fierce enough to make even the most ordinary gesture feel eternal. And then, on August 5, 2023, the unthinkable struck with a cruelty no heart could prepare for. Brian Randall, only 57, still so young, still so needed, slipped away after 3 years of being slowly stripped by ALS. Sandra was there, holding his hand, her children pressed close as silence fell like a crushing weight that no one could lift. No cameras, no scripts, no applause. Only the ragged sound of grief inside 4 walls. The man who had filled their home with laughter was gone, and in his place was an emptiness so vast it seemed to swallow the air itself. For Sandra, it was devastation beyond words. She had finally found the love she thought life had denied her, a man who saw her not as a star, but as simply Sandra, a woman worth cherishing, and she was forced to watch him vanish like smoke between her fingers. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, Every whispered promise at his bedside had been an act of defiance against time. And still, time won. For Louis and Lila, who had once slipped drawings into his hands and climbed onto his lap for stories, the loss was a wound they were too young to name, but would carry forever. Their family of 4, once whole, had been broken apart by a thief no one could fight. The house that had echoed with ordinary joys, birthday candles, shared dinners, the quiet miracle of belonging, now echoed with absence. The walls themselves seemed to remember him, and in their stillness lay the cruel reminder that even the brightest flame can be snatched away by fate's cold hand. For Sandra, who had endured betrayal, humiliation, and every storm Hollywood could conjure, this grief was deeper, raw, more merciless. Headlines could never capture it. The Oscar on her shelf could not comfort it. Fame could not shield her from it. This was not just loss. It was the shattering of the only safe haven she had ever built. In the aftermath of Brian Randall's passing, Sandra Bullock found herself standing in a silence that felt both foreign and familiar. She had weathered storms before, public betrayals, humiliations, the relentless scrutiny of a world that never seemed to tire of watching her rise and fall. But this was different. This was a private devastation, a wound that no headline could truly describe, and no amount of public sympathy could heal. For the first time in her life, Sandra was forced to navigate a grief so profound that even her legendary resilience seemed to falter. Yet, even in the depths of her sorrow, Sandra's instinct was to protect her children. She became a shield for Louis and Lila, determined that their memories of Brian would be filled with warmth and laughter, not the shadow of illness or the ache of loss. She kept his photographs close, told stories that made them smile, and let their home remain a place of comfort, rather than a shrine to what had been lost. In the quiet moments, she allowed herself to grieve, but in the presence of her children, she chose hope. It was a delicate balance, honoring her own heartbreak while guiding her children forward, teaching them that love, even when it ends in loss, is always worth the risk. But as Sandra tried to find her footing in this new reality, another storm erupted, this time not within her home, but on the world stage. Just 9 days after Brian's death, the film that had once symbolized her greatest professional triumph, The Blind Side, was suddenly dragged into controversy. Michael O'Hare, the man whose story inspired the film, filed a lawsuit against the Tuohy family, claiming he had been deceived and exploited. Though Sandra had no legal connection to the case, her name was thrust into the headlines, bound forever to a story that was now being questioned and picked apart. The timing was almost unbearably cruel. As Sandra mourned the loss of the man she loved, she was blindsided by a wave of public scrutiny and social media outrage. Voices rose, not with empathy for her grief, but with demands. Demands that she return her Academy Award, as if she bore responsibility for events far outside her control. The same role that had brought her to the peak of professional recognition now became a weapon used to wound her when she was already brought to her knees. For anyone else, it might have been too much to bear. But Sandra Bullock, shaped by a lifetime of adversity, chose once again to respond with silence and dignity. She refused to be drawn into the spectacle, refused to let anger or bitterness define her. Instead, she anchored herself in motherhood, in the daily rituals that gave her life meaning and structure. She made pancakes for her children, walked them to school, and found solace in the ordinary moments that had always been her true source of strength. Professionally, Sandra stepped back from the spotlight. After the whirlwind of The Lost City in 2022, she announced she would take a break from acting to focus on her family and her own healing. Hollywood, ever hungry for the next comeback, speculated about her return, but Sandra remained steadfast. She was not retired. She still produced through Fortis Films, still shaped stories from behind the scenes. But for now, her most important role was off-screen. Her world became smaller, more private, centered around her children and the sanctuary she had built for them. She found comfort in the homes she had worked so hard to create. A Malibu retreat overlooking the Pacific, a Beverly Hills refuge wrapped in trees and silence, a beloved escape on Tybee Island in Georgia, where the ocean's steadiness offered a kind of therapy no doctor could prescribe. These were not just properties, they were safe harbors, each one a testament to decades of discipline, daring, and the relentless pursuit of peace. Sandra's net worth, estimated at $250 million, was the result of box office triumphs, historic negotiations, and a career that had spanned every era of modern Hollywood. But she often said her true wealth was measured in ordinary mornings with her kids, in the laughter that filled her kitchen, in the simple act of being present. For Sandra Bullock, survival was never about the spotlight. It was about what remained when the lights dimmed. A mother, a survivor, a woman who had learned to turn even the deepest heartbreak into a quiet, unbreakable grace. As the storms of 2023 finally receded, Sandra Bullock stood in their aftermath, no longer defined by scandal or loss, but by the quiet strength of a woman who has endured it all. At 61, she carries not only the weight of her scars, but also the grace of survival. Her beauty remains luminous, though it now carries the lines of nights lived in both laughter and tears. She keeps her health with discipline. Pilates, kickboxing, cycling, even weekend dance sessions with her children, and her famously simple skincare routine. Proof that resilience is not just spiritual, but physical. Public appearances are rare, but when they happen, fans are struck by her radiance. Not in spite of her pain, but because she has carried it with grace. Sandra's story today is not about constant visibility or endless projects. It is about what remains when the lights dim. She is a woman who has faced betrayal, break-ins, illness, loss, and the cruelty of judgment, and yet still chooses love. A mother who places her children above career, above applause, above everything. A survivor who has shown the world that strength is not loud. It is steady, quiet, and unbreakable. Her Oscar will always shine. Her films will always endure. But perhaps her greatest legacy is this, the proof that dignity can outlast devastation. In the quiet of her Los Angeles home, Sandra finds herself reflecting on a life that has been anything but ordinary. She remembers the little girl who never quite belonged, the young woman who fought for every inch of her place in the world, and the mother who would give up everything to protect her children from the pain. She knows all too well. She remembers the nights spent rehearsing lines in a freezing New York apartment, the sting of rejection, the thrill of her first big break, and the heartbreaks that followed. She remembers the love she found, the love she lost, and the love that remains in the laughter of her children, and the memories that fill her home. Sandra's journey is a living anthem. Proof that triumph is not handed to you in moments of comfort, but hammered into being in nights of hunger, rejection, and relentless work. From raiment to riches, from obscurity to one of the most bankable stars on earth, her story reminds us that the fire of resilience can turn even the coldest winter into a crown of victory. She has loved through betrayal, cared through illness, and stood through loss. And in 2023, she carried the storm of a lifetime, losing her great love and being unfairly judged by the world. Yet still, she remained unbowed, unbroken. A woman who answers cruelty not with fury but with grace. For her children, Sandra is not just a star or a survivor. She is the center of their universe, the steady hand that guides them through life's uncertainties. She teaches them that strength is not about never falling, but about always getting back up. That love is not about perfection, but about presence. That dignity is not about pride, but about compassion, in the sanctuary of their home. She is simply Mom, the one who makes pancakes on Sunday mornings, who listens to their fears, who celebrates their victories, and who holds them close when the world feels too big. For her fans, Sandra remains a beacon, not just of Hollywood, but of humanity itself. She is a reminder that even the brightest stars are not immune to darkness, but the bravest are the ones who fight to heal. Her films continue to inspire, her story continues to resonate, and her example continues to light the way for anyone who has ever felt lost, broken, or alone. As Sandra Bullock looks to the future, she does so with the quiet confidence of someone who has survived the unimaginable and emerged with her spirit intact. She knows that life will always bring new challenges, new heartbreaks, and new joys. But she also knows that she has the strength to face whatever comes next. Not because she is fearless, but because she has learned to keep moving forward one step at a time, no matter how heavy the burden. So, as we look back on the journey of this extraordinary woman, marked by triumphs, scars, and an unshakable grace, we are reminded of the quiet power of resilience. Sandra Bullock is not only a star we watched on screen, but a survivor who continues to walk through life with dignity and love. And before we go, don't forget to hit like as a gesture of tribute to Sandra Bullock. A star, a survivor, and above all, a mother whose strength continues to inspire the world.